Now, I just want to get serious a minute. There's a story I've been following closely here on JK Live. We did a special on the Post Office Horizon scandal. You might have seen this. Hundreds of sub-postmasters across the United Kingdom are still to this day, my friends, fighting for justice after being falsely accused of theft after faulty accounting software was introduced in 1999. We did a show and we spoke to a lady who literally admitted to something under duress, it seems, from her legal team because the system is so warped, and spent 9 months in jail. This is a story that a wonderful, wonderful man, Nick Wallis, the author of The Great Post Office Scandal, has been following. And today, the inquiry heard more evidence from senior figures. And I wanted to just briefly bring Nick on and get an update because it is something that we as a show want to follow. Nick, welcome back to JK Live. What did we learn on top of what we talked about before today, my friend?
Hi, Jeremy. Well, today was a disclosure hearing, so-called because the Post Office, you may remember, in May this year, released some information through a Freedom of Information request to a campaigner, which revealed that as late as the last decade, they were racially classifying their sub-postmasters using incredibly offensive terms like Negroid and Siamese. And this caused a storm, not just because of the racially offensive terms themselves, but because the ongoing statutory inquiry took notice of this, had a look through its own documents and couldn't work out why they hadn't been given a copy of it, because they're legally entitled to this information when they asked for it. So all hell broke loose over the summer. The inquiry had a spanner put through its works as we tried to get to the bottom of why the Post Office had been failing in its legal obligations to disclose incredibly important information to the statutory inquiry. And today's hearing was all about listening to senior Post Office legal people explaining what had gone wrong, how they were trying to fix it, and why it shouldn't happen again. But I must admit, after the hearing, I wasn't left with any confidence that that would be the case.
It's really interesting. We probably got more response from that Jeremy Kyle Investigates the Post Office Scandal than any other, Nick. And for me, I did the show with you and I said that I knew very little. I think everybody was touched. And what you sort of come away from it thinking is, have the Post Office, the people in charge now and in the past, got any idea of the scale of misjustice that has been hanging around for as long, well, 15 years, 15 plus years? I mean, this is, it's beyond contempt. And I know that the new head of the Post Office sort of makes certain comments, but I hope that there is some form of answer for these people, because those stories we showed, people, I mean, the lady, Nicola Archer, I think, and if I've got her name wrong, I apologise, I haven't got the papers, sat on this show and said, I don't know if anybody watching this saw this, that she and her husband were accused of stealing. There was no way out. They were told that they were the only people, they were going to lose it. They actually sat down and decided that they might well end their lives together. People in jail, people's lives blighted forever. Surely, without wanting to over-egg it, Nick, heads must absolutely roll, mustn't they?
Well, no one has been held to account for what's happened over the last 20 years, whether it be the people who designed the software, which was an arm of the Japanese computing giant Fujitsu, or the Post Office, or the government, which of course owns the Post Office as well. This is one of those stories that reels you in, and it was fascinating to see you over the course of the discussion that we had just get more and more absorbed in this, because I've been following this story for 13 years, and at each turn I am astounded at the levels of incompetence displayed, not just by the previous people running the Post Office, but the current management as well. One of the things that came out of the inquiry hearing today was a senior lawyer who'd been co-opted in to help the Post Office get to grips with the inquiry. He said he didn't seem to get any understanding that the Post Office executives knew how important and how big a statutory inquiry was, and therefore he was constantly battling with them to get the money and resources he needed to provide the documentary disclosure to the inquiry that it required. So we've got this pattern of inept management, which has been a feature of the prosecutions, of the cover-up, and of now the unravelling of this huge scandal which has taken place over the last 3 years. And the central feature of it is the Post Office's inability to corporately get to grips with the scale of the disaster that it's visited on so many people.
And I think that's the point. I don't know if you were listening, but we started this show tonight with the story that Birmingham City Council, the largest in Europe, has actually gone bankrupt to the tune of £1 billion, and it will be the British taxpayer, starting with the Birmingham taxpayer that picks up the bill, Nick. I remember, and you're absolutely right, that the show I was doing it, and I was totally absorbed, and I've talked to so many people because I think it's absolutely appalling. I think it's a disgrace. And yet I remember somebody on the show said to me, ultimately, it might have been you, the Post Office will not have enough money to sort this out, and that will come back on central government and the taxpayer. And you sit here as a taxpayer and you go, sorry, how, for however many years, has such incompetence been allowed to continue, as you said? And then you add to that the personal trauma of people and what they went through and the sacrifices and the thing, the most telling things was when people said to us, Nick, that their communities shunned them. Family and friends thought, you're a tea leaf, you're no good. And they had to deal with all of that. And you wonder whether the people in charge of the Post Office, whether the people who were ringing and saying, oh, you're the only person that's complained, keep quiet, pay your money back, it's you. Did these people just get themselves into a hole they couldn't get out of? Did they know what they were doing? Did it just engulf them as well? Because it's an extraordinarily horrible, horrible story.
Yeah, and the problem with it is there is no way in this country of properly holding people to account. If you look at every single corporate disaster that's been visited on the public over the last, 40 years, going back to the infected blood inquiry, through the banking scandal, through Hillsborough, through the Windrush scandal, every single time, no one has properly been held to account. Who has gone to prison as a result of these awful wrongs visited on citizens of the state? I always come back to the point that the primary role of the state is to keep its citizens safe. In the Post Office scandal and with so many others, the state actively harmed the people it was meant to be protecting. And yet no one has gone to prison. No one has been properly criminally prosecuted for anything to do with the Post Office scandal
the innocent
yet.
sub-postmasters.
That's the grand irony of it, isn't it? The poor people at the bottom of the pile are the ones who suffer the most. And those who make the decisions, sometimes with malicious indifference as to the consequences, know they are going to get away with it.
Indifference is a great word, Nick.
Country.
Indifference is a great word, because I think you actually shine a light absolutely that there always seems to be a way for certain people in certain organisations, institutions, to pass the buck, get away with it. You start with politicians. Somebody said to me the other day, Jez, you rant on about, the NHS should be better, the education. I mean, what did we have yesterday? Crumbling schools. Politicians are only interested in getting re-elected, or governments are interested in being re-elected, and it's not about legacy and it's not about long-term planning. Somebody, and thank God you've written this amazing book, The Great Post Office Scandal, and thank God you're following this, and we will continue to follow it, because it is one of the biggest miscarriages of justice, and it does actually shine an awful light on Great Britain in each and every way, and I completely agree with you. How long do you believe this inquiry could take? I mean, when will these people get justice? What is justice? A few quid? That's not justice, is it?
No, I mean, the inquiry is expected to report next year, but I'll believe that when I see it, because these things, well, it's already overrun. It could well overrun into 2025. The report that will be then delivered by the chair of the inquiry, Sir Wyn Williams, could point to potential criminal activity by some of the people who have been involved in this scandal, and then you will have a Metropolitan Police inquiry, which will no doubt run on for years and years and years after that. In the meantime, you've got all the sub-postmasters who are currently waiting for proper compensation, and that has become a litigious mess as well, which the government are in the throes of trying to sort out, although of course they're partly culpable themselves. The government set aside, or the Treasury set aside, £1 billion to compensate and pay for the compensation schemes for the sub-postmasters caught up in this scandal. But we don't seem to have any effective way of transferring that money, now it's been set aside, into the pockets of the people who are harmed the most. I keep coming back to this point that until there are consequences for those at the highest level in public life, serious criminal consequences for making malicious decisions in bad faith, we will get scandal after scandal after scandal in public life, and it will never be fixed.
Nick, always a pleasure, and we will continue to follow this story, the Horizon Scandal of the Post Office. Nick Wallis, author of The Great Post Office Scandal.